Welcome to The Curious Case, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Today I'm bringing you a gripping new mystery, featuring the astute and perceptive Miss Marple, a beloved amateur sleuth with an eye for detail and a knack for uncovering secrets. Settle in, and let's dive into this intriguing puzzle together. And hey, feel free to leave a quick comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. It's always wonderful to hear from our close-knit detective community. The Lavender Hill Inn was one of those quaint countryside retreats that seemed to breathe stories from its very walls, narrow winding hallways, floorboards that groaned underfoot, and the unmistakable scent of lavender drifting from sachets tucked into antique dressers. It wasn't quite a hotel, but rather a sanctuary of nostalgia, where time seemed to slow down. Miss Marple had been invited by her old friend Evelyn Hart, a fellow garden enthusiast, who had insisted that a few weeks in the idyllic Cotswolds would be just what they needed. The inn's charm, however, came with an unsettling undercurrent, a feeling that Miss Marple couldn't quite place but chose to quietly observe. Upon arrival, Miss Marple was greeted with tea and an air of reserved politeness, as if the other guests were reluctant to welcome a stranger. Among them was Beatrice Cavendish, a former actress whose dramatic presence seemed to fill the room, eyes sparkling with secrets, and a voice that lingered like a distant melody. Always close by was her younger sister Alice, timid and watchful, seemingly overwhelmed by Beatrice's charisma. Then there was Gerald Price, a brooding writer who seemed more at ease with his notebook than with people, and Margaret Dale, a socialite whose every word felt like it was rehearsed, pearls glinting against her collar. Rounding out the group was Dr. Harland, a kindly physician with a gentle manner, and Vincent Blake, a charismatic young man, whose easy charm didn't quite mask the tension in his gaze. That evening, gathered in the sitting room, the guests engaged in what seemed like routine chatter, drinks by the fire, Evelyn at the piano playing a lilting tune. Beatrice sat back, her laughter just a bit too loud, her gaze drifting between her sister and the staircase, as if keeping a secret vigil. In the midst of the low conversation, Beatrice's voice broke through with a line that seemed to shatter the cozy atmosphere. "Grief is a stubborn companion," she mused, swirling her drink. "It never leaves, it just finds new corners to hide in." Silence fell, the words hanging like a shadow over the room. Alice's hand trembled as she poured more wine into her sister's glass, her movements practiced but tense. Later that night, as the inn settled into an uneasy sleep, Miss Marple sat by her window, knitting, when a sudden muffled sound reached her ears, not quite a scream, more like a strangled cry, almost swallowed by the night. Moments later, she saw a thin line of light spill from under Beatrice's door, flicker, then vanish into darkness. Miss Marple noted it, but kept her silence. In the morning it was Alice's scream that roused the household. Beatrice was found at her vanity, one arm hanging limply, her once vibrant face pale and still. On the mirror, in smeared bold lipstick, a single word: regret. The scene was chaotic. Dr. Harland confirmed the inevitable, while the others speculated wildly. Was it suicide? A dramatic farewell? Miss Marlowe's keen eyes caught the pattern of the lipstick stroke, uneven, shaky, as if written by someone unfamiliar with the act. Vincent leaned against the doorframe, murmuring, "She always did love a grand exit," while Margaret whispered about Beatrice's penchant for melodrama. Gerald, seemingly unaffected, jotted down notes, as if the tragedy had sparked his imagination. Miss Marple said little, but her mind whirred, recalling how Alice had moved to pour the wine the previous night, how Beatrice's words seemed almost rehearsed, and how regret felt like a message left behind not for Beatrice, but for someone else. As the room filled with hushed whispers and accusing glances, Miss Marple couldn't help but wonder who, among them, carried the heaviest burden of regret, and who had made sure Beatrice would never speak of it again. Miss Marple entered the room with quiet resolve, her gaze sweeping over the scene with the precision of a seasoned observer. The room itself seemed frozen in time, the vanity table strewn with scattered makeup, the cracked mirror catching shards of light, and the lipstick tube lying awkwardly beside an empty glass. But what caught her eye was something far more peculiar: the gold-engraved powder compact, usually positioned near Lydia's brush set, was open and abandoned at the far edge of the dressing table, as if it had been moved hastily and forgotten. Miss Marple didn't rush to conclusions. Instead, she simply folded her hands neatly in front of her, appearing almost serene, as if she were watching an overgrown garden, where secrets had sprouted like wild, tangled vines. She knew better than to force the truth. It would reveal itself in time, through the subtle shifts of those involved. Inspector Cray arrived a few minutes past 10, his presence filling the room with a sense of finality. His boots tracked mud across the floor, his mustache bristling with the air of someone who believed the case was already solved before stepping through the door. "Suicide," he proclaimed, his tone carrying an air of weary certainty. "You'll find it's typical in cases of emotional instability, likely exacerbated by drink. The lipstick message is just a dramatic touch. Stage people can be rather melodramatic, can't they?" Miss Marple remained quietly seated in the far corner, her teacup steady in her hands, not offering any contradiction. She had seen Cray's kind before, men so convinced by their own conclusions that they missed the vital details hiding in plain sight. Cray's investigation was as hasty as it was superficial. He questioned the guests with the mechanical efficiency of someone checking train schedules, rather than lives entwined in tragedy. Lydia's glass was examined for traces of alcohol, and Clara's hurried explanation of Lydia's long struggle with anxiety was noted down as if it were an undeniable truth. "Sorrow," Clara had whispered, eyes glistening but dry, repeating the word like a mantra. Cray nodded, satisfied. Guilt, grief and regret, a cocktail that explained it all. Miss Marple, however, noted the way Clara's hands didn't shake, how her grief seemed too composed, too carefully displayed. And then there was the compact, still on the corner of the vanity, not where it should have been, a small, almost forgettable detail, but one that tugged at Miss Marlowe's thoughts like a loose thread. At breakfast, the air was thick with unease. The guests gathered, moving through the motions of normalcy, though the conversation felt fragmented and forced. Mr. Hugh Brandon grumbled about the overcooked eggs, his irritation almost deliberately mundane. He didn't look up from his paper, but his hands kept folding and unfolding his napkin, as if his nerves couldn't quite settle. Clara, pale and collected, spoke in low, careful tones, her spoon stirring tea with an absent rhythm. Fear, Miss Marple thought, not grief. Fear wrapped tight around her like a shroud. Dr. Penrose attempted to lighten the mood with a story about a medical mishap, his laughter thin and hesitant, while Mrs. Fanshawe took charge of the dining room with an air of authority. "We mustn't dwell," she announced, glancing around as if to dare anyone to disagree. Miss Lydia would not have wanted gloom. "We must carry on." Tommy Ridge, meanwhile, flitted from guest to guest, his charm a little too bright, his compliments a touch too eager. Yet whenever his gaze drifted toward Clara, his smile faltered, and Clara's shoulders stiffened, as if anticipating a blow. Miss Marple saw it, the tension between them, unspoken but palpable. The inspector was content with his verdict, but Miss Marple knew better. She glanced at the compact again, that small, seemingly insignificant detail gnawing at her. A woman as meticulous as Lydia would never leave her compact out of place. As the morning unfolded, Miss Marple felt the pattern taking shape, a web spun not by grief, but by fear, by the desperate need to conceal something far more sinister. The truth, she knew, would come not from questioning, but from watching the way people held their cups, how they avoided certain topics, how they glanced at each other when they thought no one noticed. Miss Marple sipped her tea, patient and calm. The truth wasn't just hiding, it was simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to be exposed, and when it did, it would unravel not just the story of Lydia's death, but the tangled lives of everyone in that quaint, deceptively peaceful inn. The atmosphere in the drawing room was thick with tension, each whispered word and sideways glance adding another thread to the intricate web of unease. Tommy Ridge, usually so quick with a joke or a charming smile, now seemed almost mechanical in his movements. Each time he laughed, it felt rehearsed, a tight, brittle sound that didn't match his eyes, which darted from face to face as if searching for reassurance. Miss Marple, watching from her corner, noted how the room was filled, not with people mourning a tragedy, but with individuals caught in a web of fear, some thrashing to break free, others pretending they didn't feel the snare tightening around them. There was something ugly moving beneath the surface, something that twisted the polite words and carefully folded napkins into sinister shapes. The morning crawled on, sluggish and uneasy. Tea was served with a clink of porcelain, newspapers were skimmed without real interest, and small talk attempted, valiantly, but in vain, to drown the silence that loomed between the guests like a dark, pulsating shadow. It was during a muted game of bridge in the drawing room that the first real crack appeared. Mrs. Fanshawe, reaching into a side drawer to fetch a fresh scorecard, froze mid-motion, her gloved fingers brushing against something unexpected. She let out a faint gasp, eyes widening as she withdrew a small velvet pouch, deep red with a golden clasp. Holding it up like an unearthed relic, she placed it on the table as if presenting some long-lost treasure. Inside, nestled in the soft lining, was a necklace, a delicate Art Deco piece with a sapphire pendant that glinted under the dim afternoon light. "I say," muttered Mr. Brandon, his gruff voice low with confusion, "wasn't Miss Veal wearing that last night?" Clara, seated near the window, looked up, her voice no louder than a whisper. "I fastened it for her myself," she said, her eyes unfocused as if sifting through a troubled memory. "But she wasn't wearing it when—" Mrs. Fanshawe cut in abruptly, as if unwilling to complete the thought. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Tommy Ridge reached for a biscuit, but his hand hesitated, his jaw clenching just slightly. Miss Marlowe, knitting serenely in the corner, missed nothing. The way Clara's fingers twitched at the hem of her sleeve, or how Tommy's cheer seemed almost painted on. Later, in the dimly lit corridor outside the lounge, Miss Marlowe overheard hushed voices, Tommy and Clara, their words sharp with tension. "You should have told them," Clara hissed, barely keeping her voice steady. "Keeping it makes it worse." Tommy's reply was quick, too quick. "I didn't take it," he shot back. "But someone clearly wants to make it look that way." Miss Marlowe didn't linger, didn't need to. The whispers were louder than any admission, betraying more than intended. As the afternoon stretched on, the house seemed to absorb the fear, its walls holding secrets as tightly as the people within. Lydia Veal, once a fading starlet known for her charm, now haunted the manor, in death more profoundly than in life. Her presence was no longer just a memory, it was a weight pressing down on everyone, growing heavier with each passing hour. Miss Marlowe stirred sugar into her tea thoughtfully, her mind tracing patterns through the fragments of conversation and the glint of that misplaced necklace. Lydia hadn't just been melodramatic, she had been meticulous, deliberate, as if even in her final moments, she had been setting the stage for something far more complex. The things Lydia said, and more importantly, what she didn't say, were like cues in a performance, strategically placed, designed to provoke or conceal. The realization settled in Miss Marlowe's mind like a stone dropped into still water. Lydia knew something, and she had been trying to expose it without directly pointing fingers. As dusk approached, the guests gathered again, drifting into the lounge like sleepwalkers, unsure whether to confront the tension or pretend it wasn't there. Rain tapped at the windows, slow and methodical, matching the gloomy rhythm of the house. Clara sat hunched over a crossword puzzle, shading in random letters without forming words, her hands trembling despite her otherwise calm demeanor. Mr. Brandon grumbled about the persistent rain, but his voice lacked conviction. Dr. Penrose, who had been unusually quiet since breakfast, offered no medical theories, his usual verbose manner subdued to mere nods and occasional glances. Mrs. Fanshawe, however, broke the silence with a clipped, almost defensive tone. Lydia wasn't just dramatic, she stated flatly. She liked to know things about people. She collected secrets like other women collect trinkets. Mr. Brandon frowned, a distant look clouding his features. "She knew things about all of us," he murmured. "It wasn't just gossip. Sometimes it felt like she was studying us, piecing things together." Dr. Penrose cleared his throat, but whatever he meant to say died in his throat when Mrs. Fanshawe shot him a warning look. Clara remained silent, her face pale, her pencil scratching nonsense on the crossword. Miss Marlowe, her knitting needles clicking softly, didn't interrupt. She merely observed, letting the truths and half-truths dance around the room like shadows. It wasn't just grief, it wasn't even just fear, it was guilt, thick and stifling. Someone had something to hide, something Lydia had known or hinted at, and in her final act, She had left behind not just mystery but suspicion, intertwining everyone's secrets into a knot too tight to untangle without unraveling someone's life. As the rain continued to drum against the windows, Miss Marlowe remained calm, allowing the pieces to fall into place. Whatever the truth, it was there, crouching just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to rear its ugly head. And when it did, Miss Marlowe would be ready, her mind already spinning theories, her instincts sharper than ever. The truth, like a storm, was coming, and no one could stop it. The room was steeped in a peculiar quiet, one that seemed to thicken with each passing second. Conversations flickered and faded like half-formed thoughts, never fully igniting. Seated near the hearth, Miss Marlowe let her knitting needles dance with a calm, rhythmic precision, her gaze flicking across the room without truly settling on anyone. A shadow had settled over the gathering, more palpable than any storm outside. Grief had its way of hanging heavy, but this wasn't just sorrow, this was something twisted, too tidy to be genuine, as if the grief itself was rehearsed, lined up neatly like guests at a funeral. It was Tommy Ridge who broke the silence, forcing a laugh too sharp to feel real. "Funny thing," he muttered, "how Lydia always had a flair for drama. Even in death, she's got us all twisted up." Mrs. Fanshawe, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, nodded solemnly, but her eyes didn't quite match her sympathetic tone. "She was always overwhelming," she offered, almost as if confessing a truth she'd kept buried. The fire crackled, and Clara's pencil moved across her crossword, forming the word overwhelmed, as if the letters themselves were mocking her. Miss Marlowe noted it with a slight tilt of her head, her lips barely moving as she mouthed the letters, almost as if tasting them, overwhelmed by sadness, or perhaps by something else entirely. As the afternoon dragged on, the room's atmosphere grew denser. Over tea and biscuits, small talk flowed in awkward, fragile bursts. Mrs. Fanshawe remarked, with a touch of poetic lament, how fitting it was that Lydia's last word had been sorrow. Mr. Brandon, without looking up from his book, scoffed softly. "She always had a knack for dramatics," he said, but the way he said it, flat, dismissive, and too controlled, made Miss Marlowe narrow her eyes, just a fraction. "And yet," she said, almost to herself, "it was an odd choice of words, wasn't it? Sorrow, a peculiar sentiment to leave behind. One wonders what she truly meant." Mr. Brandon cleared his throat, his fingers tightening around his cup. "She was unstable. Everyone knew that," he said, but his hand paused before lifting the tea to his lips, his thumb tapping twice against the porcelain. Miss Marlowe's gaze flicked to the far wall, where a small gilt-framed mirror hung, polished, pristine, and reflecting nothing but its own emptiness. Later, as the rain drummed a relentless rhythm against the windows, Miss Marlowe caught Tommy Ridge and Clara whispering in the hallway. "You should have told them," Clara hissed, eyes darting toward the drawing room. "Keeping it makes it worse." Tommy's voice was tight, defensive. "I didn't take it. Someone's setting me up." Miss Marlowe slipped away before they noticed her, the pattern in her mind growing clearer, like a slowly unraveling thread. At dinner, Dr. Penrose tried to lighten the mood with a story from his medical practice, but the moment the conversation circled back to Lydia, his demeanor shifted. "I didn't see her that night," he said abruptly, too fast, too certain. No one had asked him, and yet his denial hung in the air, heavy and unwelcome. Tommy looked up, puzzled. "What do you mean?" he pressed. The doctor's jaw tightened. "I stayed in my room, didn't hear a thing, thought it best to keep out of the fuss." Miss Marlowe's lips curved just a little. "How fortunate for you, doctor," she murmured. A sound night's sleep when others had such restless hours. The conversation fell into uneasy silence, and Miss Marlowe's needles resumed their steady rhythm. Innocent people didn't usually feel the need to announce their innocence so boldly. Across the room, Mr. Brandon's book lay untouched, his eyes fixed on the mirror again, its clean surface an echo of something he couldn't quite forget. Miss Marlowe knew well enough that mirrors had a way of holding secrets, sometimes even more stubbornly than people. As the evening wore on, snippets of conversation swirled around the room, pieces of memories, misplaced words, and half-hearted reassurances. Tommy's anxious laughter, Clara's whispered concerns, and the doctor's overly confident protests all pointed to one thing: fear, not just of what had happened to Lydia, but of what her death might uncover. By nightfall the storm had settled into a soft drizzle, but the tension remained, like a breath held too long. Miss Marlowe glanced once more at the mirror, its gilded edge catching the dim light. Sometimes a reflection wasn't just a mirror's burden, it was a hint, a clue, a reminder of what had been seen, and what had been deliberately ignored. Lydia's final act wasn't just an echo of melodrama, it was a statement, a final push to force hidden truths into the open. And as the house settled into uneasy quiet, Miss Marlowe knew that the truth would emerge, shattered, messy, and undeniable, just like a mirror breaking under the weight of too many lies. The wind howled through the narrow streets of Ravenswood, a town steeped in secrets and shrouded in fog. Inside the grand but crumbling manor on the hill, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The air smelled faintly of dust and old wood, and the faint glow from the flickering candles gave the place a haunted feel. As the guests gathered in the drawing room, whispers circled the space like restless spirits, hinting at tragedy. At the center of it all lay the lifeless body of Evelyn Hart, her pale hand clutching a worn leather-bound diary. Inspector Callum Hayes, sharp-eyed and meticulous, surveyed the room, his mind piecing together fragments of truth buried in a web of deceit. Mr. Buddell, Evelyn's estranged brother, stood rigid, his jaw clenched as if fighting back words he dared not say. "Overdose," muttered Dr. Collins, pointing at the scattered pills on the floor, his voice hollow. "She must have taken too many. It's tragic, but it fits." The others seemed almost relieved, as if suicide were a more comforting answer than murder. Miss Adelaide, Evelyn's closest confidant, shook her head slowly, eyes glazed with disbelief. "Evelyn would never, not like this," she whispered. Callum crouched, examining the diary, flipping through the brittle pages until he found a single line scrawled hastily: "They're watching, they know next." A chill settled over the room, tightening around the guests like a noose. As Callum looked closer, he noticed something odd. The bottle of pills wasn't Evelyn's usual prescription. Miss Adelaide, hands trembling, confirmed it. She hated taking sleeping pills, always said a glass of port did the trick, she murmured. Callum's eyes narrowed, the cogs in his mind clicking into place. If the pills weren't hers, someone had staged this, deliberately framing it as a suicide. A subtle glance at Mr. Buddell revealed his eyes fixed on the fireplace, avoiding Callum's gaze. Later, in the village pub, Callum questioned Mr. Buddell, who hesitated before admitting, "Evelyn wasn't supposed to inherit the estate. It was meant for me until she found that damned diary. She threatened to expose something about our father." Callum's thoughts raced. An old scandal, a hidden truth worth killing for. Back at the manor, Callum found Miss Adelaide pacing the hall, her nerves frayed. "She showed me the diary a week ago," Adelaide confessed. "It mentioned a child, a secret heir. Evelyn was determined to find them, to put things right." As the clock struck midnight, Callum gathered everyone in the drawing room. "Evelyn didn't die by her own hand," he announced. "She was silenced, the pills were planted. Someone feared what she would reveal." Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Mr. Buddell's face turned pale, and Dr. Collins wiped sweat from his brow. Callum's gaze fixed on Adelaide. "You knew about the heir. You feared Evelyn would give the estate away. But it wasn't you, was it?" Adelaide's lips trembled. "No, but I saw something Mr. Buddell, arguing with Evelyn 2 nights ago. He said she'd ruined everything." Mr. Buddell erupted, denying it, but his alibi fell apart when Callum revealed the innkeeper's testimony. Buddell had left the manor late that night. As the truth sank in, Callum laid out the final piece. The diary wasn't just a record of Evelyn's thoughts. It was a ledger detailing funds siphoned off by Buddell. Caught, Buddell's demeanor crumbled. "She wasn't supposed to dig up the past. I needed that inheritance," he shouted. As the police took Buddell away, Callum glanced at the manor, its shadows stretching long into the night. Secrets buried for decades had finally clawed their way to the surface, deadly, unforgiving, and impossible to hide forever. The old mansion loomed over the quiet village like a dark sentinel, its windows shattered, and ivy creeping up its weathered stones. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of decay, dust dancing in the rays of moonlight seeping through the cracks. In the grand hall, a lifeless body lay sprawled on the cold marble floor. Isabella Crane, the reclusive heiress, her once vibrant eyes now staring blankly into the void. In her clenched fist was a crumpled letter, its ink smudged but still legible. The past never dies, they know. The villagers whispered about her tragic end, rumors spreading like wildfire. Some claimed it was an accident, a fall from the winding staircase. Others whispered of a curse that had plagued the Crane family for generations. Detective Julian Hart, sharp-minded and unflinching, stepped into the mansion, his presence silencing the murmurs. As he examined the scene, his eyes fell on a broken locket on the floor beside the body, a locket Isabella never took off. He pocketed it, sensing its significance. The housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, wrung her hands anxiously, her voice trembling. "She'd been acting strange, sir, talking about shadows following her, and someone watching from the garden at night." Hart's gaze shifted to the window overlooking the overgrown garden, the silhouette of the ancient willow tree swaying ominously. "Was anyone seen entering the grounds?" he asked. Mrs. Gable shook her head. "No one, sir, but sometimes I heard whispers, not hers, someone else's." As Hart inspected Isabella's room, he found a hidden compartment in her wardrobe, a bundle of old letters wrapped in a crimson ribbon. The letters spoke of a secret child, born out of wedlock, hidden away to protect the family name. One letter, dated just days ago, read, "I can't keep this secret any longer. The truth will come out. They must know." Hart's thoughts raced. Was Isabella planning to reveal a long-buried scandal? He heard a creak behind him, and turned to find Samuel Crane, Isabella's distant cousin, pale and agitated. "She was mad, you know," Samuel muttered. "Always talking about some secret. It was nonsense, no proof." His eyes darted nervously. Later, at the local inn, Hart questioned Samuel, who was tight-lipped about his relationship with Isabella. "We weren't close," he insisted. But when Hart mentioned the letters, Samuel's face darkened. "She was lying, always had a flair for drama. There was no child." That night, as Hart sat by the inn's hearth, piecing together the fragments of truth, a figure appeared at the door. Lydia, the gardener's daughter, eyes wide with fear. "I saw him that night," she whispered. "Samuel, he was in the garden, arguing with Isabella. I didn't hear much, but he kept saying, 'You'll ruin us all.'" As dawn broke, Hart returned to the mansion, where Samuel was packing in haste. "Leaving so soon?" Hart asked, blocking the doorway. Samuel stammered, but Hart cut him off, revealing the locket, now opened, to reveal a faded photograph of a young woman holding a baby. "She wasn't lying, was she? You knew about the child, and tried to silence her to keep the Crane fortune intact." Samuel's shoulders slumped, guilt etched into his face. "It wasn't supposed to go that far. She threatened to expose everything. I couldn't let her destroy our name." As the constables led Samuel away, Hart glanced at the mansion one last time, the weight of secrets and betrayal hanging in the chilly morning air. The past had clawed its way to the surface, unstoppable and unforgiving, and the Crane family would never be the same. The old manor stood eerily silent under the pale moonlight, its windows dark and foreboding. Inside, the parlor was filled with tension, as Miss Eliza Granger surveyed the crime scene. The lifeless body of Cecilia Wren lay sprawled near the ornate fireplace, her hand stretched toward the cracked mirror on the wall. Smeared across the glass in bold crimson letters was a single word, betrayal. The shade of red was peculiar, vivid, almost garish, so unlike the muted tones Cecilia usually preferred. As Eliza examined the writing, she couldn't help but notice the lipstick tube left haphazardly on the nearby table. It struck her as odd. Cecilia had always been meticulous, her belongings neatly arranged. Yet the shade of red seemed off, not matching the signature burgundy that Cecilia favored. Eliza's keen eye picked out another inconsistency. The brand itself was different, a more expensive line that Cecilia never purchased. A flicker of doubt crossed her mind. Could someone have deliberately chosen that lipstick to stage the scene? Her thoughts were interrupted when Dr. Harold Reeves entered. His usual composure rattled. "Strange business," he muttered. "Did you know Cecilia was corresponding with someone recently?" She mentioned feeling watched. Eliza nodded, recalling the letters Cecilia had shown her, unsigned, vaguely threatening, hinting at secrets long buried. Dr. Reeves hesitated, then revealed something more. A patient of mine, a woman named Clara, used that very shade of lipstick. She's been acting strangely since Cecilia's death. Claimed she knew nothing, but I sensed she was hiding something. Eliza's mind raced. Clara had been a close friend of Cecilia's, yet lately there had been tension between them, whispers of betrayal and jealousy. Was it possible Clara had tried to frame Cecilia's final message? Eliza decided to dig deeper, starting with Clara's belongings. In Clara's dressing room, she found a compact similar to the one on Cecilia's nightstand, both engraved with the initials, CW. Yet Clara's compact was filled with a softer coral shade of lipstick, the one she usually wore. Suspicion gnawed at Eliza. Returning to the parlor, she examined the scene once more. The lipstick, the word on the mirror, the misplaced compact, it didn't add up. Just then, Clara appeared in the doorway, pale and wide-eyed. "I didn't kill her," she whispered, but Eliza noticed her fingers trembling, stained faintly with red. Eliza calmly confronted her. "You moved the compact, didn't you, to make it seem like Cecilia wrote that message? But you didn't notice one thing, the lipstick. You grabbed the wrong shade, Clara. That red, it wasn't hers. You staged the scene to look like a confession, but you slipped." Clara's shoulders slumped as the truth unraveled. "She found out about me and Harold, threatened to expose us. I never meant to." Her voice broke, and Eliza took a step back, piecing the final fragments together. Clara had tried to make it seem like Cecilia's guilt, but the details didn't align. The betrayal wasn't Cecilia's, it was Clara's. As the police led Clara away, Eliza remained by the fireplace, contemplating the twisted nature of love and jealousy. The lipstick had been a symbol of passion, now tainted by a darker truth. In the dim light, the word on the mirror seemed to shimmer, almost as if mocking the secrets that had finally come to light. The old mansion loomed ominously under the moonlit sky, its once grand windows now veiled with dust and cobwebs. Inside, the air was thick with silence, broken only by the faint creak of floorboards. Detective Evelyn Hartley, known for her sharp mind and unwavering resolve, stood in the drawing room, examining the crime scene. On the floor lay Margaret Sinclair, the town's beloved historian, her eyes wide open, frozen in terror. Clutched in her hand was a weathered leather-bound journal, its pages smeared with what appeared to be ash. Above her, scrawled hastily on the faded wallpaper, was a single haunting word: regret. Evelyn's keen eye noted the oddity. The ink used to write the word was faded, as if aged, unlike the fresh ink stains on Margaret's fingers. Near the fireplace, she spotted a half-burned letter, the script barely legible, hinting at a long-lost secret. Evelyn glanced at the journal, flipping through its fragile pages. It chronicled Margaret's research into the mansion's cursed history, a tale of betrayal, hidden wealth, and a family torn apart by greed. Evelyn's instincts tingled as she pieced together the fragments of a story buried for decades. Suddenly the door creaked open, and Agnes, Margaret's estranged sister, stepped in, eyes red from weeping. She was obsessed, Agnes whispered, always digging where she shouldn't. She found something that should have stayed hidden. Evelyn studied Agnes, noticing her trembling hands and the faint scent of smoke clinging to her clothes. Did Margaret mention finding a document? Evelyn probed, but Agnes just shook her head, averting her gaze. As Evelyn dug deeper, she learned of a family rift. Margaret believed that their grandfather's will had been altered, disinheriting their branch of the family. Recently, Margaret claimed to have discovered the original will, proving the wealth belonged to them. Agnes, desperate and fearful of losing her livelihood, had confronted Margaret the night she died. Evelyn's thoughts raced as she examined the letter again. The partially burnt words revealed a name: Agnes. A chill crept up Evelyn's spine as realization struck. Margaret had been trying to protect her sister. The word regret wasn't a confession but a warning, a plea for forgiveness. Agnes had found the will first, and in her panic, set it ablaze. When Margaret tried to salvage it, the confrontation turned violent. Evelyn confronted Agnes, her voice firm but sympathetic. "You tried to cover your tracks, But Margaret's last act wasn't to accuse you, it was to shield you. She knew you didn't mean to kill her. Agnes broke down, the weight of guilt overwhelming her. It was an accident, she sobbed. I just wanted to keep our life our home, but she wouldn't stop. As the truth sank in, Evelyn couldn't help but reflect on the mansion's legacy, a legacy stained with secrets, greed, and now a tragic mistake. As Agnes was led away, Evelyn remained in the drawing room, gazing at the word on the wall, regret. Sometimes, the past couldn't be undone, and the price of keeping secrets was too high to bear. In the stillness, Evelyn whispered to herself, some regrets never fade, no matter how hard we try to forget. The room was quiet, almost too quiet, as Detective Evelyn Hart watched Claire sitting across from her, shoulders tense, eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. Evelyn kept her voice calm, deliberate, her gaze fixed on Claire, not letting a single flicker of emotion slip through. You know, Claire, Evelyn began, her tone steady, almost comforting. Guilt has a way of seeping through the cracks, no matter how hard you try to patch them up. Claire didn't respond, but her hands tightened into fists on her lap. Evelyn continued, her words a careful weave of sympathy and purpose. When I first saw the note that said, "Regret is my prison," I thought it was just another cryptic message from a broken soul, but it wasn't, was it? It was a confession, not about remorse, but about being trapped by something far more sinister. Claire swallowed hard, her lips pressed into a thin line. You were protecting something, or someone. I couldn't figure it out at first. The flowers at the grave, the old toy left on the doorstep, clues that didn't make sense until I looked at the photograph again. You see, that photo wasn't just any memory, it was a reminder of what you were trying so desperately to keep hidden. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper. It was about the child everyone thought was gone, but wasn't. Claire's composure wavered, and she looked down, tears welling in her eyes. Evelyn didn't push, just gave her a moment, the silence hanging heavy between them. You didn't mean to hurt anyone, Evelyn pressed gently, but Lydia found out the truth, didn't she? She knew the child was still alive, and when she threatened to expose you, you panicked. Claire's shoulders shook, and her voice broke through the silence, soft, trembling. I just wanted to protect him. Lydia, she wasn't supposed to know. I did everything right, kept the secret, but then she found out, and she wouldn't listen. She kept saying it wasn't fair, that he deserved the truth, but I couldn't let her ruin everything. Evelyn stayed silent, letting Claire's words tumble out, raw and unguarded. I didn't mean for her to die, I just wanted her to stop. I thought if I gave her something to calm down, to make her see reason, but it was too much. She never woke up. Evelyn's heart ached for the broken woman before her, but duty came first. Sometimes, she said softly, protecting a lie can cost more than facing the truth. Lydia didn't want to take him away, Claire. She just wanted to help. Claire sobbed openly now, her carefully built facade crumbling. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't lose him. He's my life. Evelyn nodded, understanding the desperation, but knowing it didn't change the outcome. The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. You couldn't let go of the lie, and now it's taken everything from you. The room seemed colder now, the weight of confession settling in. Evelyn knew that in this line of work, truth and guilt were often intertwined, but sometimes, the cost of one outweighed the other. As Claire's sobs quieted, Evelyn knew the case was finally closed, but the scars it left would never fully heal. The room felt colder than usual, shadows pooling in the corners, like ink stains on the worn wooden floor. Detective Isabel Monroe stood near the flickering lamp, watching the figure hunched in the chair, Daniel Wright. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling as he clasped them together, fighting the urge to run. Isabel's voice, low and unyielding, cut through the tension. You know, guilt doesn't just disappear, Daniel. It sticks to your soul, no matter how hard you try to scrub it away. You can't hide from it, not forever. Daniel looked away, swallowing hard, his jaw clenched as if holding back words that threatened to escape. Isabel took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. When I found that letter, it was clear that someone wanted to forget, but guilt doesn't work that way. It digs in, festers, and when you least expect it, It forces its way to the surface. A single tear traced a path down Daniel's cheek, but he didn't move to wipe it away. Isabel's tone softened just a fraction. You didn't mean for it to go this far, did you? You thought one lie would be enough to protect the truth. But lies have a way of multiplying, and soon they're more suffocating than the truth ever was. Daniel's shoulders sagged, his defenses crumbling. I never wanted to hurt her, he whispered, his voice fractured and raw. Isabel didn't look away, but she found out, didn't she? Sarah was too close to the truth, and you couldn't risk it. The night she confronted you, the shouting, the threats, it wasn't supposed to end that way. Daniel's hands trembled harder, his eyes squeezed shut. She wasn't supposed to die, he choked out, a sob breaking free. I just wanted her to stay quiet. I never thought she would fall. Silence swelled between them, thick and suffocating. Isabel allowed the confession to settle, the truth heavy and undeniable. You were desperate, she said, more to herself than to him, protecting someone else, someone innocent. You thought if you kept it hidden, it would just go away. But guilt doesn't work like that. Daniel looked up, eyes rimmed red, his voice barely audible. It wasn't just her, there was someone else. Someone who knew. I didn't want to hurt them too. Isabel's heart pounded. Another secret buried beneath the another truth, fighting to be heard. Who, Daniel? She pressed, her tone fierce. He hesitated, glancing at the door as if fearing who might be listening. Ellie, he whispered. She knew, she saw everything. I begged her to forget, but she wouldn't. Said the truth would eat me alive. Isabel's jaw tightened. Ellie had vanished the night after Sarah's death, leaving only a single word scrawled on the bedroom mirror: remorse. Isabel had thought it was Ellie's guilt, but now, hearing Daniel's confession, it took on a darker meaning. She left because of you, Isabel said slowly, realization dawning. She didn't just disappear, she ran from the truth, and from you. Daniel nodded, broken. I couldn't keep it up. I was losing my mind. Every time I looked at her picture, it was like Sarah was staring back at me, accusing me. Isabel took a deep breath, steadying her own emotions. The truth always surfaces, Daniel. You can try to bury it, but it will claw its way out. Now it's time to stop running. As officers led Daniel away, his sobs fading down the corridor, Isabel remained in the dim room, staring at the letter once more. A single sentence echoed in her mind. The burden of guilt is heavier than any truth. The case was closed, but Isabel couldn't shake the feeling that guilt would continue to haunt Daniel, long after his secrets had been uncovered. The wind howled outside, and as Isabel moved to leave, she noticed something glinting on the floor, a small pendant that had slipped from Daniel's pocket. She picked it up, her heart sinking as she recognized it. Ellie's. A new question bloomed in her mind, darker and more twisted than the last. Was Daniel protecting someone else, or had the truth been more tangled than even he knew? Isabel slipped the pendant into her pocket, her instincts buzzing. The case wasn't over, not yet. As she walked out into the cold night, the weight of unresolved guilt followed her, whispering that sometimes the truth didn't just surface, it shattered lives when it did. Amelia stood motionless by the old stone bridge, her silhouette outlined by the waning light of the evening. The sky above was bruised with shades of purple and grey, and the air was thick with the kind of stillness that only comes after a storm. She tightened her grip on the worn leather journal in her hands, its pages crinkled and stained from years of secrecy. Her heart pounded, each beat resonating with the weight of the truth she had uncovered. Just a few hours ago, the village had been alive with the mundane routines of daily life. Children chasing each other through the cobblestone streets, merchants calling out their prices, and laughter echoing from the tavern. Now all of it seemed distant, like an illusion that had shattered the moment Amelia read those damning words. She glanced down at the journal again, the ink smudged from the tears she hadn't realized she had shed. Each word seemed to burn into her mind, branding her with a secret too devastating to keep, yet too dangerous to reveal. The soft murmur of the river below pulled her from her thoughts. The water moved steadily, indifferent to the chaos within her. It flowed around the large rocks, creating small eddies that spun leaves and twigs in circles. Amelia watched them absently, her mind racing with the implications of what she had learned. She could see it all clearly: the accusations, the blame, the unraveling of lives if the truth came to light. The lantern hanging from the bridge post flickered weakly, its glow casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward her, as if reaching out to share her burden. She thought of the child, sweet, unknowing, blissfully unaware of the storm about to engulf them. The child was innocent, untouched by the choices of those who should have known better. Amelia felt a pang of sorrow cut through her resolve. How could she protect that innocence without betraying her own sense of justice? A sudden rustle behind her made her turn. Inspector Gray approached, his heavy coat trailing along the damp ground. His face, usually composed and confident, now bore the unmistakable lines of uncertainty. He stopped a few steps away, his gaze fixed on her face, searching for answers he feared to hear. "You've made your decision?" he asked, his voice low and weary. Amelia nodded, though the motion felt like a betrayal to herself. "It's not just about what's right or wrong anymore," she whispered, struggling to keep her voice from trembling. "It's about the lives that will be shattered. The child deserves a future, one that isn't tainted by the sins of the past." Gray exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his duty. "Sometimes, Amelia, the hardest choice is the one that hurts the most. Protecting the innocent often means living with the guilt ourselves." He hesitated before continuing, his tone softening. "But are you sure hiding the truth is what's best?" Amelia looked away, focusing on the river again. The water was dark now, reflecting the night sky that had crept in while they spoke. "If I expose the truth, it will destroy more than just the guilty. It will rip apart families, ruin lives that are already fragile. I can't be responsible for that." The silence between them grew, dense and suffocating. Gray looked at her with something like understanding mixed with regret. "You're shouldering a heavy burden," he said quietly. "Sometimes doing the right thing feels the most wrong." Amelia's throat tightened, but she managed a nod. As Gray turned to leave, she stayed by the bridge, her heart aching with the decision she had made. She had always believed that truth was a light that guided people out of darkness, but now, standing in the growing shadows, she couldn't help but wonder if some truths were better left buried. As dawn's first light began to break, Amelia remained rooted to the spot, gripping the journal as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. The river continued its unending journey, whispering secrets to the stones that lined its bed, and in that quiet moment, Amelia knew that the secret she chose to protect would live on, buried not by lies but by the silence of those who knew the pain it would cause. She couldn't help but wonder if one day, when the child grew older and the truth inevitably resurfaced, they would understand why she made this choice, whether they would forgive her for choosing to protect them by sacrificing the truth. The world around her seemed to hold its breath as if mourning the decision she had made. With one last look at the dark water below, Amelia took a deep, shuddering breath, and walked away from the bridge, the weight of her choice pressing down with every step. The morning would come soon enough, bringing with it new challenges, but for now, all she could do was hope that one day, her decision would make sense to the one it was meant to protect. Sometimes the most haunting secrets are not the ones we uncover, but the ones we choose to bury. Imagine being faced with a truth so devastating, so powerful, that revealing it would destroy everything you've worked to protect. What would you do? Would you risk tearing apart lives and relationships for the sake of honesty, or would you take that dark, irreversible step to keep the secret safe? It's a question that lingers like a shadow, pressing down on your conscience with the weight of moral dilemma. Clara found herself trapped in this very web, torn between exposing the truth that would unravel her world, and concealing it to protect the one person who mattered most. The child, pure and untouched by the sins of those around them, remained at the heart of her decision. Clara's love and fear intertwined, forcing her to make an impossible choice, one that could never truly be right or wrong. In the end, Clara did what she thought was necessary. Some might say she was justified, driven by love, compelled by a fierce instinct to shield the innocent from the pain of betrayal. Others might argue that the truth, no matter how painful, should never be hidden. But that's the complexity of human nature, isn't it? Sometimes our choices are less about what's right, and more about what we can live with. Clara's decision was not one born out of malice, but of desperation, a desire to protect even if it meant sacrificing her own peace. But let me ask you this, if you were standing in Clara's shoes, knowing that exposing the truth would shatter lives, would you take that risk, or would you too hide behind the veil of secrecy, convinced that protecting the innocent justified the lie? It's a thought that lingers, challenging our own sense of morality. I'm genuinely curious, do you think Clara made the right choice? Would you have done the same, or would the weight of deception be too much to bear, no matter the cost? Drop your thoughts and theories in the comments. I can't wait to hear your take on this moral maze. If you enjoyed diving into this intense, thought-provoking mystery, make sure to subscribe for more stories that make you question the choices we make. And don't forget to share this video with fellow mystery enthusiasts who thrive on stories that blur the line between right and wrong. Stay tuned. More gripping tales are just around. Gay. More gripping tales are just around the corner.